Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you this afternoon about a sector that I follow at Euro-Pacific Canada. I specifically follow the Canadian healthcare sector, and so I thought that the focus for my presentation today, I thought, would best be to give you a few key concepts on how to conceptualize how to make prudent investments in the Canadian healthcare space, and then perhaps to overlay a few key concepts on how healthcare investing overall can be a profitable enterprise for you, looking at international markets as well.
下午好，各位。今天下午呢，我呢将给大家讲一下这个加拿大的医疗保健方面的这个股票投资的这方面的问题，给大家介绍呢一些概念，怎么样呢来提高您的收益？如果您在医疗健康方面投资的话。
So the basic overview of my presentation today will sort of be divided up into 5 little mini sections here. And I'll just fly through them here as they're presented on the slide in front of you. So I thought I'd just take a few slides just to try and justify for you why the healthcare sector is one that can generate positive returns for investors. And I'll try and give you some data that supports that thesis.
好，下面我今天要讲述的几个呢，都在在黑板上面，大家可以看一下。那么呢，我要用一些数据来证明，如果您投资这个医疗呢，怎么样也可以呢，有获利。
And secondly, I wanted to take a few moments to just kind of explain some of the ways in which healthcare investing does differ from other sectors. There are some elements that one has to be aware of when investing in healthcare specifically, and so there'll be a few bullets on a few slides subsequent to some of my general market comments where I hope to kind of put into context how one needs to think about the healthcare sector in order to make prudent investments in the space.
然后呢，我再给大家讲一下，就是医疗保健这方面的投资呢，与其他行业的投资有什么不同？另外还给大家呢做一些这方面的评论，市场方面的。
One of the key elements that we look at on identifying coverage stocks in our world is identifying companies that would be attractive not just to investors, but to other companies who may seek to acquire our coverage stocks through an M&A transaction. And so trying to understand what other companies are looking for in an acquirable firm are as important to us when we identify or when we're making recommendations to our clients as are the underlying fundamentals of the company itself.
另外呢，我们不仅要知道一下，就是说投资的哪一些股票，另外呢，还要了解一下其他公司之所以投资这家公司呢，有什么原因。
And then points 4 and 5 here I'll just tie together. I wanted to give you a sense of where some recent acquisition activity has generated positive returns for investors. They're all well-known public companies that have been acquired recently, many firms that you may be familiar with. But I just thought I'd summarize them just to give you, a sense of how positive the investment experience has been in healthcare recently. And then I'll try and give you a few ideas on how to make money going forward, and then we'll just tie everything up with a ribbon at the end and invite your questions thereafter.
好了，那么第4个和第5呢，我准备呢2个合在一起给大家介绍。介绍的时候呢，看一下就是说为什么呢这些投资这些医疗有一些股票可以帮您获利。之后呢，我再给大家介绍一些我的一些看法。之后呢，就结束我的今天的发言。
So let me start off by proving to you that you can actually generate positive returns in the Canadian healthcare sector. One of and this is a slide that I actually put in my own slide deck when I am presenting my coverage universe to institutional clients. I try and convince them that yes, this is a sector that one should focus on, precisely because the returns can be so substantial. So in the top left-hand corner here, that is the recent share price chart for a company called Concordia Healthcare.
现在这张图片上呢，这是我自己组合的。那么在上面的这是一家这个医疗健康的这个公司，然后看一下它这个股票的走向。
And the stock chart to the right here is called, the company is called Techmira Pharmaceuticals. You may in fact have seen me on the Business News Network talking about this specific stock within the last couple of months, a firm that has been developing an Ebola therapeutic that is now being used under an expanded access program in Western Africa in order to attempt to partially attenuate the spread of Ebola in that region. And you can see that the stock chart has reflected investor enthusiasm for that program.
那么在右边的这家公司是这个药品公司 TKM。那么它呢，这家公司你可以看一下它的走向，它这个走向呢，它就是看到这个投资者呀非常热衷于这张股票，那么它在这个非洲呢也有这方面的投资。
And the returns for two other stocks, so this is Neovasc here at the bottom left-hand part of this panel, and this is a company called Maris Labs on the right-hand bottom part of the panel, and you can see that recent returns have been correspondingly positive for this medical technology firm and this specialty pharmaceutical firm, respectively. Very different types of companies, though they fall within my coverage universe, and yet the returns have been correspondingly positive.
那么下面这两个呢，一个是药品的 ，NVC 是药品的，然后 MSL 呢是指的这个也是指药品的这个股票，你看他们的回报呢是比较高的。
So if you want more evidence that this is a sector worth following, let's have a
如果
look at
你
this.
需要更多的这方面的证据呢，可以看一下这个表格，这个图表。
This is a chart that it's just a graphical depiction of how respective indices in North America have performed over the last 4 or 5 years.
这个指的是在过去的4、5年当中啊，他们的这个他们的表现。
So what we have done in order to present the concept that we're trying to present here. So what we did was we arbitrarily set each of the Amex Biotech Index, the NASDAQ Biotech Index, the NASDAQ Composite Index, the TSX S&P Index, and the Dow Jones Industrial Index. Arbitrarily set each to 100% in October 2008, when, as you may recall, was when capitalism fell and the capital markets experienced a material decline.
那么这张图表呢，上面画有 AMEX 的生物化学，然后呢 NASDAQ 还有生物化学，还有 NASDA 它的这个的走向，还有 TSX 走向，还有道琼斯工业指数走向。这个时间段呢是在2008年10月，那个时候呢正好有经济危机。
And as you can see, the Amex and NASDAQ biotech indices have been two of the most solidly performing indices over the corresponding period from late 2008. And we certainly use this data as supporting evidence for how investors not only are deploying capital into the healthcare and life sciences sector and generating solid returns as a consequence, but this also signals that with its upward trajectory that there are still returns to be generated in this sector.
那么在这个图表上呢，我们看一下AMEX 和 NASDAQ。它呢，这两个都是比较在2008年的时候底呢，已经是非常坚挺的两只股票，那么就是有回报的了这两只。
Now, if you think I'm cheating by just picking 2008 as my starting point, let's move the graph back ahead a little bit, and let's arbitrarily set the beginning of 2012 as our 100% point.
好了，如果你认为我刚才讲的是在撒谎的话，我们看一下从2012年，那么我们是自己设定的这个图表，那么是从100%开始的。
And as you can see, the returns are even more dramatically separated from the other major diversified indices than they were in the previous graph, showing a 3-year average consolidated rate of return approaching 300%. In the life sciences sector, this is admittedly U.S. weighted indices, but still a solid reflection of how the sector has generated substantial returns over a trailing 36-month period.
那么这个在3年范围内呢，你看它的这个走向呢，就是说回报的它这个都是比较高的，它是回报率是300%。
Now, it's one thing to talk about the fantastic returns you can generate in this sector, but there are several, not peculiarities, but there are several unique elements that one needs to be aware of when looking to deploy capital into the life sciences sector, and I'll spend the next few slides just summarizing a few of the key points there.
好了，下面呢，我要接下来给大家讲的就是说这个医疗融资它的环境以及其他行业的差别。
Now, because life sciences companies and healthcare companies in general often generate shareholder value through clinical or development or technical events rather than cash flow generation, analysts like myself and investors must make investment decisions based not just on information that they do not know, but on information that they cannot know. And that does heighten the financial risk that investors do incur when seeking to deploy capital in this space.
那么呢，这个这个医疗保险医疗这方面的投资呢是非常独特的，因为呢它呢这些数据呢你是根本没有办法知道的。比如说它需要这些股票投资呢进行科研方面的研究，这些数据你是没法知道，不是说你不知道的。
And I sort of made the second point in my initial comments there, but just to repeat it, evaluation metrics in the life sciences sector often are driven less by tangible cash flow generation than they are by companies realizing clinical and development stage milestones that can thus generate future cash flow. And it is our job as financial analysts to sort of make that connection between how clinical and technical events can lead to future cash flow and in so doing generate shareholder value.
那么同其他的行业相比较，分析来看呢，通常呢其他的是有形的现金流预期，除了采矿业之外。那么通常呢，在医疗行业分析呢，常常是无形的，通常是临床的。
And financial analysis in the life sciences sector tends to be driven less by macroeconomic factors that can allow analysts covering other sectors to kind of drive sector rotation, in much the same way that, say, seasonality would impact valuations of utility costs, or general economic vitality might impact occupancy rates in real estate assets. There tends to be less cyclicality in the life sciences sector, and so it tends to be companies in the space tend to be valued on company-specific rather than industry-specific metrics.
那么同其他行业相比，像分析呢，通常呢这个行业是专注于宏观经济或者是宏观产业因素，他们如何能够指引行业转移的时机，并且医疗行业分析更加看重于其公司自身因素的选股。
And while life sciences equities are tied to general capital markets buoyancy, as all stocks are, the elements that tend to drive valuation in other sectors, again, just to repeat my earlier point, tend not to be as relevant to healthcare valuations, which tend to be driven by their own unique metrics.
那么比如说像生命科学，这是一个很重要的。那么它在进行的当中，你不能只是看它有什么样的这个情况，要看它本身的独特的这个医疗这方面的股票它独特的特性。
So just to continue on with this theme then, the main pattern in healthcare equity markets and in the initiatives to raise capital for the sector are such that there really are no patterns that drive company attractiveness in this space. And I think that that's an important theme to emphasize, just how much of a stock picker's market healthcare as a sector is, and how even more of a stock picker's market the Canadian healthcare space is than other global healthcare markets, and that's something to be aware of as we proceed through other concepts in the presentation.
那么我今天呢，在继续往下讲其他概念的时候，大家呢需要了解的是，它有一个主要的这个规律，然后呢，这个规律是受。
I indicated in an earlier comment that one of the key drivers for any early stage life sciences investment is for investors to kind of weight the probability of how likely a company could be taken out by a larger industry player, and that value creating event is remarkably common in the life sciences sector. Other sectors see M&A all the time as well, but it is a particularly notable valuation event in the life sciences sector. And on the slide, I've given you multiple examples over the last 3 or 4 years where sizable returns were generated for early shareholders on a takeout by a larger peer.
那么在生命科学这一项呢，它其中一个最主要的驱动力就是这些投资者要看有没有大的机构介入，那它的可能性。那么接下来我们会给你一些实例。
Another important valuation driver can be recognition of a company's financial strategy by a cash contributing partner. Again, which could be one of the firms that could be an eventual acquirer of that technology, and the partnership itself quite often can generate value in capital markets.
那么另外呢，要看一下有没有现金介入，那么要认识到呢，这家公司是不是有其他人合作的伙伴。
The point I wanted to make here in this third bullet, though, was that one needs to be cautious about assessing partnerships on a case-by-case basis. It is a disconcertingly common occurrence in the Canadian life sciences space that companies often give away far too much of the economics of the technology in development to a partner who ultimately turns out not to be an appropriate one for their core business. And so while a partnership can generate a value on announcement, I think investors need to be cautious on just how positive a partnership can be to a company's longer-term prospects, and one has to kind of weigh the pros and cons of that reality on a case-by-case basis.
那么在生命科学这一方面呢，这个公司呢要平衡一下，那么与合作伙伴共同合作。它的有利也有弊，需要呢进行评估。
So just to continue on with this theme, then, the main pattern in healthcare equity markets and in the initiatives to raise capital for the sector are such that there really are no patterns that drive company attractiveness in this space, and I think that that's an important theme to emphasize just how much of a stock picker's market healthcare as a sector is, and how even more of a stock picker's market the Canadian healthcare space is than other global healthcare markets, and that's something to be aware of as we proceed through other concepts in the presentation.
那么我今天呢，在继续往下讲其他概念的时候，大家呢需要了解的是，它有一个主要的这个规律，然后呢，这个规律是受。
I indicated in an earlier comment that one of the key drivers for any early stage life sciences investment is for investors to kind of weight the probability of how likely a company could be taken out by a larger industry player, and that value creating event is remarkably common in the life sciences sector. Other sectors see M&A all the time as well, but it is a particularly notable valuation event in the life sciences sector. And on the slide, I've given you multiple examples over the last 3 or 4 years where sizable returns were generated for early shareholders on a takeout by a larger peer.
那么在生命科学这一项呢，它其中一个最主要的驱动力就是这些投资者要看有没有大的机构介入，那它的可能性。那么接下来我们会给你一些实例。
Another important valuation driver can be recognition of a company's financial strategy by a cash contributing partner, again, which could be one of the firms that could be an eventual acquirer of that technology, and the partnership itself quite often can generate value in capital markets.
那么另外呢，要看一下有没有现金介入，那么要认识到呢，这家公司是不是有其他人合作的伙伴。
The point I wanted to make here in this third bullet, though, was that one needs to be cautious about assessing partnerships on a case-by-case basis. It is a disconcertingly common occurrence in the Canadian life sciences space that companies often give away far too much of the economics of the technology in development to a partner who ultimately turns out not to be an appropriate one for their core business. And so while a partnership can generate a value on announcement, I think investors need to be cautious on just how positive a partnership can be to a company's longer-term prospects, and one has to kind of weigh the pros and cons of that reality on a case-by-case basis.
那么在生命科学这一方面呢，这个公司呢要平衡一下，那么与合作伙伴共同合作，它的有利也有弊，需要呢进行评估。
So a few other things to consider here. It's just a reality of our world at Europac and perhaps of yours as healthcare investors that most demand for healthcare equities is within international exchanges or within international investors like yourselves. And most of the demand and most of the publicly traded companies within our world are U.S. firms who invest in U.S. equities. It is an important factor for you to consider, though, that the current capital market U.S. interest in life sciences stocks is at an all-time high, and that interest in the sector broadly defined has been trickling into our Canadian life sciences coverage universe and driving valuations accordingly.
那么这个股票的投资，那么包括像你们在座的各位是属于国际这个投资者，那在美国来讲呢，这一点呢是美国这些公司生命科学是非常重要的。它包括这些目前来讲，它这个利息呢是比较高的。
It's more common for companies that are more advanced in their technology or drug development to be afforded higher market valuations and also be able to raise equity capital from a broader audience of institutional and retail clients than an early stage company might. There are exceptions to that rule, and where exceptions are prevalent, is a solid signal that sector attractiveness is growing. And on the second bullet here, I provided a couple of examples of very early stage technology and or drug developers that were able to garner sizable amounts of capital on new equity issues. And these two examples show us that the sector is and should continue to be buoyant on a capital raising capabilities basis.
那么这些呢，就是说，这个市场的投资，还有呢这些技术方面呢，对它呢也是起的一个，尤其是在这个早期的这些早期阶段的这些公司，那么其他的大公司的介入投资是非常重要的。我们这里也举了2个例子。
Now, the medical technology sector in Canada has, for most of its history, been a great way to lose money rather than to make money certainly within the publicly traded stocks that we follow. We are seeing some solid signals that that trend could be reversing, both in terms of the underlying attractiveness of the space, lots of M&A activity going on in medtech world in the U.S., but also we're just seeing an enhancement of company quality in our view. So that ticker symbol NDQ stands for Novadaq Technologies. That ticker stands for Neovasc. And we believe that those are industry-leading technology developers in the surgical imaging and in the cardiovascular device development space. And so we highlight those two stocks as two examples of how the medical technology space is one where we're starting to see some enhanced value in our world. And I'll give you a bit more specific details toward the end of the
那么
presentation.
现在呢，在加拿大来讲呢，现在这个医学方面的这些基本上是这些股票现在是在赔钱。那么呢，将来如果想不挣钱的，那么现在呢，我举的这两个例子呢是Nordox 还有 NVC 啊，这在历史上现在因为大家已经意识到这个医学这个方面这个的它的重要性，所以呢现在呢它暗含的意思呢现在就是也在有好转。像这两个呢，一个是有心脏这个做这个扫描之类的。
So again, just to provide you with a bit more life sciences specific context for how the sector behaves. Underperformance of other sectors is it's typically a driver for encouraging investors to deploy cash into other sectors, and I would just say that I would caution one to not expect that to happen within the healthcare space with any degree of frequency. Healthcare attractiveness tends to be driven by its own specific metrics, which again is a theme that I was building on earlier. And in fact, underperformance of other sectors like resources or real estate or financial services or so forth, just it tends to encourage investors to actually spend more time focusing on those sectors than to deploy capital to a high-risk sector like healthcare. So again, just hammering home the point that healthcare investments need to be driven by healthcare-specific drivers and healthcare-specific factors, independent of any sector rotation metrics that would be relevant to other sectors.
那么现在我讲一下这个医疗金融它的表现。那么呢，它呢也是受到其他的行业的影响。那如果其他行业不利的话，对它呢是有很大影响的。那么呢，我们需要做一些适当的改变，然后呢使它本身不受到这些行业的影响。
I'm going to tie these next three bullets into a single comment just to say that the valuations in life sciences, because they are driven by events, or check that, they commonly are driven more by events and less by near-term cash flow. It makes investor understanding of how the market value and share price will trend on a day-to-day basis more challenging than it would be were their valuation driven by cash flow. And accordingly, we also see that because valuation is challenging, that stimulating investor attention for smaller cap, more entrepreneurial firms can be challenging in a challenging market. Fortunately, because of the indices performances that I showed you on previous slides, we're certainly seeing that investors are increasingly deploying their attention to life sciences investments, and we think that can drive not only financing activity but and trading activity post-issue, which is will drive market valuations for attractive firms.
那么这个医疗行业呢，它基本是由于它器械的先进程度来达到目的的，而不是有现金流的。那么现在呢，它的挑战呢继续存在，并且呢这个情况不是很乐观的，因为还没有产生自由现金流的科技开发公司获得的机构注意力比较少。另外呢，对小盘股陷阱的专注增加，消极的反馈回路等等。
And then one last point here before we'll get into a few what I hope are interesting specifics in our coverage universe is that it's always important to be aware that timelines to product development in healthcare, services companies notwithstanding, tend to be longer than timelines over which an investor would normally expect a rate of return on an equity investment. And so because timelines on drug development tend to be measured in quarters to years, and returns on a stock tend to be measured on microseconds to hours to days, it's important for investors to realize just how unique the two time domains are on an investor's return on capital expectations in comparison to product development expectations, and to understand how that relates to when you would wish to make an equity investment in a company of that type based on an understanding of how long the timelines can be.
时间线呢，对于这个医疗行业的股票呢是非常重要的，因为作为投资者呢，你需要非常清楚，因为医疗行业的产品开发时间与这个时间线与合理的资本回报时间根本是大相径庭的，跟这个软件的开发是完全不同的。
And so a few other themes and observations here just to tie everything together. We are certainly seeing the specialty pharmaceutical sector driving valuations in the space. Let me tell you what specialty pharma means. So sometimes that term gets a little bit confused in some of the popular press. So a specialty pharma company sells pharmaceuticals to specialty physicians and not to general practitioners or family physicians. So a specialty physician is one whose job title has an ologist at the end of it. That's a gastroenterologist or a urologist or a dermatologist. And a company of that type sells unique products that perhaps have a smaller achievable market than a general chronic disease targeted medical therapy would, but it can be deployed to that market with far lower marketing and administrative costs, and so the margins can be more attractive as a consequence.
那么它这些股票呢，它药品呢，它专门呢有销售给这些专门的医生的，就是后边的这个英文的字带 IST 这样的，然后呢他们呢就会获得呢专门制造的药品是销售给这样的这个医生的，所以它的这个行业呢有一个专门的特殊的这个特点。
Now, because our successful companies tend to get acquired a lot, as I've mentioned before and as I'll show you in a few slides, one of the cautionary elements on the space is that our mature firms tend to have their names changed or tend to be rebranded under the acquirer's brand and not the acquiree's brand. Paladin Labs, the exception recently, not the rule. And so one of the cautionary elements of the space is that we tend to see less of a sort of a trickle-down effect from successful investments in the life sciences space, sort of driving investor interest in earlier stage investments of that type. Again, specialty pharma would be the exception and not the rule within that comment.
那么需要大家注意的就是说，那些比较成熟的那些公司呢，它呢因为在这个行业有很多这个合并的现象、收购的现象，那么它合并收购之后呢，它可能把它名字呢变成比较成功的那家公司的名字，所以呢，尤其在早期的时候呢，会有这种情况出现。
And one other unique element of my space is that after product development has concluded, companies have to go and ask the government for permission to sell their product through agencies like the FDA or Health Canada. And again, that's just an extra layer of regulatory risk, which we call clinical risk, that one has to be aware of when deploying capital in the space.
那么在这个早期的时候，大家也要注意了。那么就是说，在这个医疗产品这开发出来之后，他们需要到获得政府的批准，MBA 这个地方。然后呢，大家要知道，它这个具有一定的这个危险性的。
So I'll fly through the next set of slides fairly quickly. This slide is, again, just returning to the theme on how M&A activity can drive valuations. This is actually a list of companies that I have covered in my history of covering publicly traded stocks at Euro Pacific, and before that at other IROC licensed dealers. Companies like Axcan Pharma, Medicis Health, Draxis Health, Arius Research, and Cryocath were firms on which we either had a unique view or a singular view on their acquirability, and they generated solid returns from the point that we covered them till when they were taken out. Most of these are in 2008, but I mean, as you can see, those numbers are robust and certainly would incentivize investors to look at new companies of the type that were similar to those that were acquired here.
这张图表上显示是加拿大很多家这个医疗股啊，他们进行这个收购交易，然后呢实现了他们的价值。左边呢列出他们这些公司的名称，然后呢在右边呢写出他们的收益的情况。
And other more recent acquisitions, also within my coverage universe, which means I have to look for other things to cover, but that's my problem, not yours. It would be a drug developer YM, healthcare services laboratory services firm CML Healthcare, specialty pharma firm Paladin Labs, manufacturer Patheon, and plasma products developer CanGene. Again, all coverage stocks of ours that generated solid returns in much the same way that the firms on the previous slide did.
这上面也是继续介绍了一些加拿大的一些医疗股。那么1、2、3、4、5，上面数呢这五只股票呢，你看他们的收益呢都是不错的。
Now the next set of slides are just showing you in graphical form what those returns look like. I'll fly through these fairly quickly. So this slide has the returns for CML Healthcare and YM on the day they were acquired.
这个我就快一点讲了，这上面就表示这个 CML 还有 YM 他们这个收益的情况。
Patheon and Paladin Labs, CanGene, and then Atrium Innovations, which was the nutritional supplement firm that was in the group of companies that I didn't cover, but actually was about to.
还有这个 Concordia 呀，还有 Atrium Innovation 呢，这个我之前没有讲，现在呢我要提了一下。
This graph just shows you levels of financial activity within the life sciences space, magnitudes of capital raised both from financing activity in the burgundy bars or from partnering activity in the gray bars. And you can see that while this does fluctuate somewhat from quarter to quarter and from year to year, that there has been a fairly stable basal level of financial activity within life sciences, and balance sheet strength is a core driver for being able to generate clinical milestones that drive market valuations, as we've been describing in previous slides.
这张图表上呢，红的是显示了这些生命科学里边他们融资的情况，然后灰色呢表示他们这个合作的情况。那么大家看一下，它这个融资的情况基本上都没有太大，都比较稳定了。
The next set of slides, this is just a set of, it's a depiction of recent returns for most of the publicly traded companies that trade on the Toronto Stock Exchange. You can see that some of the returns have been quite substantial. The bellwether, especially pharma firm in our space, Valiant Pharmaceuticals, generating in absolute terms nearly $10 billion in new market value over the last 2 years based on its strong EBITDA margins and its aggressive acquisition activity.
从这张图表看一下，这些生命科学呢，这些股票呢的公司不同，然后他们表现的业绩呢差别很大，有的呢回报率是很高的。
And on an absolute returns basis, you can see here that the biggest performer over a trailing 2-year period is Concordia Healthcare, another specialty pharmaceutical company, generating nearly over 650% return since it went public last year.
那么在这张股票上也可以看出，他们其中有一只股票呢，它的这个回报率是很高，600%多。
And so just to tie things off here, I was given my 5-minute notice 6 minutes ago. So I just wanted to make you aware that of all of the categories of healthcare investment that have generated most substantial returns in our universe and should do so going forward, the specialty pharmaceutical sector, for which Concordia, a nutritional supplement company called Neptune Acasti, for which we have positive expectations, Cipher Pharmaceuticals, which I haven't mentioned to this point, but it's another Concordia-like firm, and Maris Labs, are all poised to generate solid returns in the foreseeable future.
好了，刚才呢有人提醒我呢，现在给我5分钟时间，所以现在我简单跟大家说一下这几只股票呢，它们这个回报率都是很高的 ，Concordia 还有 Neptune、Cipher、Maris Labs。
And for more cautious investors, we certainly see a lot of dividend-generating yield plays in our space, including nursing home services providers Leisure World and Extendicare, linen and laundry services firm K-Bro Linen, and surgical services firm Medical Facilities, all of which are generating stable dividends with attractive yields.
下面讲的就是它这个分红率比较高的这么四只股票。
And I've already overstayed my welcome here, but I'll give you a couple of more key things to consider here. I have mentioned medical technology before as a space that where we think sizable returns can still be generated. I've specifically mentioned two examples to you before, Novadac and Neovasc, which I've described before. A long-time covered stock of ours, TSO3 in Quebec City, who has an industry-leading sterilization platform for whom FDA approval is imminent in our view, is another medtech firm where we think some sizable returns can be realized imminently.
下面有3只股票呢，都是比较诱人的选择，有一只呢是在魁北克的 Tosso。
And I've talked about Techmira before as one of our more attractive drug development or therapeutic development firms. I would, additionally to that, I would flag Transition Therapeutics, a firm that has a very interesting central nervous system drug called ELND-005, for which Alzheimer's disease data should be available within the next 2 to 3 quarters. We have high hopes for this product, and we think that Transition, even though its share price has performed well to this point, on expectations that drug will perform well in other studies, we would make investors aware of the fact that over a 3-quarter time horizon, which qualifies as near term in our world, that this is a story that merits your attention as well.
还有呢，这几只股票呢也有很大的上涨空间，还有上边数第3只股票，它主要研究这个药物呢是治这个中枢神经疾病的。那么在2015年的时候呢，会有一些数据呢，它现在在试验过程当中，2015年会有一些数据要发布。
I really appreciate you giving me this time to explain a little bit about our sector and our role within it. That is my time, and I just want to say thank you very much for the invitation and thank you for your attention.
好，谢谢。